Yo, what is up, you guys? Welcome back to Small Talk Sports. It's been a while. It's been about a month, but things are a little different around here. We are changing up the beat like the second half of the song Sicko Mode with Drake and Travis Scott. Today's episode is not about what's happening in sports right now. Today's episode is about one of the greatest pitchers of all time. I'm talking about Sandy Koufax. We are going to dive into his life from birth until right now, present day, what he's up to. So without further ado, buckle up. Let's get ready for some Sandy Koufax talk. But first, please use my code on Seatgeek. If you've never used Seatgeek before, use the code SMALLTALKSPORTS, all caps, no spaces. It'll get you $20 off your first purchase. So Small Talk Sports, all caps, no spaces. Seatgeek is an amazing app. It is the only place I use to buy tickets. All right, now let's hop into it. Sandy Koufax time. Sandy Koufax is one of the greatest baseball players of all time. He has 4 no-hitters, a perfect game, an NL MVP, and he was an all-star for 7 of his 12 seasons in Major League Baseball. That's something that's extremely overlooked. He was only around for about 12 years, but still achieved so much greatness. Sandy Koufax was born December 30th, 1935 in Brooklyn, New York. Pretty fitting for him. He would end up playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers, who would later move to LA. Now I'm going to go a little bit out of order here. I want to talk about September 1965. That is when Sandy Koufax would throw his only perfect game of his career. And I'm starting out of order because Jane Levy, in her novel about the legacy of Sandy Koufax, she said that the game paralleled the arc of Koufax's career. 9 innings, from nothing special to never better. So today we're going to dive into the career of Sandy Koufax and see how he went from a teen on the Dodgers with just a lot of potential and nothing else to an absolute giant in the history of Major League Baseball, in the history of Jewish culture, and just how you can be a role model to those around you while staying true to your beliefs and what you stand for. His first year on the Dodgers, as Jane Levy hinted to us, it was nothing special. He went 2-2. He had a 3.02 ERA, 30 strikeouts on the year, and about 41.2 innings. The Dodgers actually made it to the World Series this year, and even though Koufax didn't play, the Dodgers won. He'll still get his ring for that. The next year, his sophomore season in the MLB, he went 2 for 4, this time with a 4.91 ERA, nothing crazy. Another 30 strikeouts with 58.2 innings, and yet again, the Dodgers made it to the World Series, but this time they lost to the Yankees. That might be because Koufax did not pitch at all that series, but you know, he will be back in postseason play. A little spoiler alert for you. The third year for Sandy Koufax is when we started to see little inklings of something. I don't think at this point in his career anyone really knew that he would turn into this Hall of Famer that we all now know and love. But in this season, he went 5 for 4 with a 3.88 ERA. And he had over 100 innings pitched this time, 104.1 with 122 strikeouts. Not bad. The Dodgers failed to make the playoffs, and this would end up being their final year in Brooklyn before moving to Los Angeles. 1958, we're not quite at Dodger Stadium yet. The Dodgers are still playing at the LA Memorial Coliseum, I'm pretty sure. Koufax is 22 years old. He went 11 for 11 with a 4.48 ERA in over 158 innings pitched. And just a little fun fact about this season, he would actually throw the most wild pitches this year in his entire career. He threw 17 wild pitches this season. That was just something I noticed and thought, well, that's a little whack. You got to include that somewhere. The Dodgers did not make the postseason. On to 1959. So here is where Koufax started to get his stuff together a little bit. He was only 8 for 6 with a 4.05 ERA, but he actually had 173 strikeouts in a few less innings than the year prior. But he helped the Dodgers make it to the World Series, and this time they won, beating the White Sox in 6 games. Unfortunately, he did lose Game 5, the only game he started, but he had a pretty solid outing, 7 strikeouts, 1 earned run. That ended up being the deciding run in the 4th inning over at the LA Memorial Coliseum, but the Dodgers ended up winning the series the very next game. They won it in 6. It's 1960. We are welcoming Sandy Koufax into the 60s. He has his Kobe year, even though Kobe Bryant would not be born for another 18 years. This would end up being the final time in Koufax's career that he would finish with more losses than wins at the end of a season. Now, with 175 innings pitched, he had 197 strikeouts and his ERA improved a little bit to 3.91. The Dodgers failed to make the postseason. On to the next year. Now, 1961 actually ended up being a pretty pivotal year in Koufax's history. He turned it on. Okay, he went 18-13. He had 10 more wins than the year prior. He brought his ERA down to 3.52, and in over 255 innings pitched, he had 269 strikeouts. I had to double check that number was accurate. 269 strikeouts. It's a little crazy, but he's proving himself. He's stepping onto the scene, 25 years old, entering like the prime of his career. That curveball's really doing something to these batters. Those 269 strikeouts were enough to get Sandy Koufax his first All-Star appearance. He's finally selected as an All-Star. Unfortunately, the Dodgers finished second in the NL, and if you're familiar with the old school baseball postseason format, it's the first place of the AL versus the first place of the NL. That's who we decide who plays in the World Series. All these other divisional series that we know and love did not exist yet. So, hey, that is worth questioning. If we had the modern day playoff format, if this current postseason was the way it was in the 50s and 60s, how many more or maybe how many less rings does Sandy Koufax have? Actually, I can imagine many more. But anyway, moving on to 1962. Now Sandy Koufax is just racking in these all-star appearances. He earned his second career one. He gets his ERA down almost a full point to 2.52. He had significantly less innings pitched with only 184, but his strikeout total was still 215, which, look, you do the math on that, still very dominant for the amount that he pitched and played. What was significant about this year is that on June 30th against the Mets, Sandy Koufax tossed his first ever no-hitter, and he set another record that game, probably not the one he's most proud of, but with 5 base runners, that was the most base runners in a no-hitter in Dodger franchise history. So I guess the 5 base runners is not something to be completely proud of, but hey, just another place in the history books where Sandy Koufax's name is. Although the Dodgers would finish second in the NL that year, whatever Sandy Koufax did in the offseason of 1962 proved to just be absolutely legendary. What would transpire the next year, I don't think we've seen anything like it. I don't know if we ever will. 1963, Sandy Koufax won 25 games, 11 of them by way of a shutout. He only had 5 losses that year and a 1.88 ERA. Now, he had 311 innings pitched, and he finally broke that 300 strikeout mark. He got to 306, and I think it's pretty obvious. He was selected to another All-Star game. Koufax would have a lot more hardware to handle. He also got his very first Cy Young Award, as well as winning the pitching Triple Crown. For those unfamiliar, that is leading the NL in wins, strikeouts, and ERA. On May 11th, the Dodgers played their bitter rivals, the San Francisco Giants, and Sandy Koufax now tossed his second career no-hitter. Only 2 base runners this time, all right? Nowhere near that 5 mark that I don't know how proud of we are. But, I mean, look, it's a no-hitter. How can you not? Whatever. We're moving on. The Dodgers had a 99, 65, and 1 tie during this season, and they finished first in the NL. They faced off against the Yankees in the World Series. Koufax pitched games 1 and 4, and the Dodgers swept them. Both of these were complete games by Koufax. He totaled 23 strikeouts in those 2 games, and obviously, he took home his first World Series MVP. This was a storybook ending for Sandy Koufax for one of his winningest seasons in his career. This is often looked at as one of his best. But you know what? We got a lot more greatness to cover. Let's keep it going. 1964 was business as usual for Koufax. He somehow lowered his ERA again to 1.74. He had 19 wins, only 5 losses again. And in these 223 innings, he got the same amount of strikeouts, 223. And yet again, Koufax tossed a no-hitter. This time against the Phillies, it was June 4th. But honestly, between you and me, it really should have been a perfect game. The only base runner was Dick Allen, who he walked. But sure enough, Allen later got caught stealing during that inning. So no base runners past second base. That doesn't really... I'm going to take that part out. But this was also Sandy Koufax's first ever no-hitter at Dodger Stadium. So I guess that's significant. Unfortunately, the Dodgers finished below 500, 80, 82, and 2. and did not make it to the postseason. On to 1965. The thing about 1965 is that this would end up being the penultimate year of Koufax's career. That means second to last. He went 26-8 with 27 complete games, 8 shutouts, and a 2.04 ERA. He would pitch the most innings ever in his career with 335.2, and he had 382 strikeouts this season. Like, just going back and seeing all of these stats from Sandy Koufax, I wonder if he still gets enough credit, because yes, he played for such a short amount of time, but when he was playing, like, these are ludicrous numbers. Koufax was once again an all-star. The Dodgers finished first place in the NL again. Koufax got another Cy Young Award and another Triple Crown honor. But another thing that happened this year was Sandy Koufax pitched his first and only perfect game. To this day, it is still the only perfect game in Dodgers history. Shout out to Hanley Ramirez. And this was actually a lot closer than it needed to be. The final score was 1-0. This was tied for the smallest margin of victory in a perfect game, but that was September. Moving on to October, what was next for Sandy Koufax was Game 1 of the 1965 World Series against the Minnesota Twins. Now, if this is familiar to you guys, that is because Sandy Koufax did not pitch Game 1. It was the Jewish holiday of Yom Kippur, often referred to as the holiest holiday in Jewish culture, in the religion of Judaism. And since this is the most sacred holiday, Koufax had to make a choice. Am I going to pitch? Am I going to continue some of the best baseball I have ever been playing, some of the best baseball anyone has really been playing? Or am I going to stay true to myself and my values and my religion and not pitch? Sure enough, Koufax did not pitch, and now we have history as we know it. Now, I wish I could say that the Dodgers were inspired and stepped up and won Game 1, but they did not. Dodgers lost Game 1. Luckily, Koufax back on the mound for Game 2, and the Dodgers lose again. They now find themselves in a 0-2 hole. I feel like if something like this happened in modern day, the player who, I guess, wasn't pitching when scheduled would get so much scrutiny. I obviously was not alive in 1965, so I don't know what the newspapers were saying, but I can only hope and I can only imagine that they were respectful to Koufax's religion and his choice. But the Dodgers are now down 0-2. They somehow win the next 2 games. Game 5, Sandy Koufax is back on the mound. He was lights out. He had 10 strikeouts, only 4 hits, and a single walk. He even got a hit and an RBI of his own on the offensive end. I saw that. I thought it was pretty crazy. And the Dodgers lost Game 6, but Game 7, guess who's back on the bump? Sandy Koufax. He is back on the pitching mound for Game 7. And sure enough, in true Koufax fashion, he pitched 10 strikeouts, 3 hits, 3 walks. And due to his heroic efforts in this World Series, he was yet again named the World Series MVP. This was the absolute mountaintop for Sandy Koufax. This, in my opinion, was the peak of his career. In April of 1966, Sandy Koufax was told that due to a severe case of arthritis, he would never be able to pitch again. And his response was to pitch one last season, all right, the last dance, if you will. So not only would this be the final season of Koufax's career, but he would end it with the most wins of his career, 27, only 9 losses, and an inconceivable 1.73 ERA. This guy is ridiculous. He had 323 innings, 317 strikeouts, once again broke that 300 mark. And for the final time of his career, Sandy Koufax would win the Cy Young Award, as well as getting the pitching Triple Crown. The Dodgers made it to the World Series. It seemed like a storybook ending for Koufax. They're playing the Baltimore Orioles, but unfortunately the Dodgers got swept, and that is how Koufax ended his career. Koufax's final game was Game 2 of the World Series. He only pitched 6 innings, allowed 1 run, 6 hits, 2 walks, and only 2 strikeouts to end his Hall of Fame career. Koufax did not end his career the way he wanted to, of course, obviously the way we wanted to as well. And I can't help but draw comparisons to the career of Clayton Kershaw. He had a pretty terrible outing recently against the Arizona Diamondbacks. And if that does end up being his final inning pitched as a Dodger, it wasn't even a complete inning. We don't need to talk about that. It would be another time where a Hall of Fame left-hander is just kind of snubbed of riding off into the sunset, as both Koufax and, Kershaw are so worthy of doing. Back to Sandy Koufax for a second. Sandy Koufax ends his career as a leader in the Jewish community and undoubtedly one of the greatest baseball players of all time. Koufax can look back at a legacy of hard work, determination, staying true to your values, and just being a role model to everyone who has ever put on a glove or picked up a ball. The challenges he had to overcome both on and off the field, the hard work that he put in, the physical pain that pitching caused him towards the end of his career, I know that he's going to be synonymous with baseball greatness forever. He was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1972 and was the youngest ever selection at only 36 years old. Now, although Koufax did only play 12 years, where do you think he stands in all-time rankings? Koufax's career started off as nothing special and ended with never better. His perfect game started off as nothing special, and as the game progressed, was never better. That's about it for me. Sandy Koufax, thank you so much for being such a pioneer and such a legend in Jewish history, in baseball history, and American history as a whole. You got all the necessary links in my bio. Use my Seatgeek code, SmallTalkSports, all caps, no spaces. Let me know in the comments other players you want me to talk about. We have a Mookie Betts episode dropping soon. That's about it for me. I'm going to stop rambling now, and, well, Small Talk Sports.